My name is John Healy, and people know me because I published this book called, and that's how it all started. The podcast is called It's Good to Talk, and it's good to talk today because I have a special guest. Podcast is sponsored by LiffeyMovement.com, and my special guest today is Nkenchor. She is a very intelligent lady, deals with a lot of interesting stuff, wills, trusts, and estates. And I know some of you sent me questions, and I'll relay them to Lillie shortly after we have a little chat. But first, I want Lillie to introduce herself. Where were you born? How did you get into this legal will, trust, and estates? Welcome.
Thank you, John. Thank you for welcoming me. I'm happy to be on your podcast. Hello, everyone. My name is Lillie Nkenchor. I was actually born in Austin, Texas. My parents are from Nigeria, so they jumped around a couple of different states before we finally settled on Providence, Rhode Island. So even though I was born in Austin, Providence, Rhode Island is home. As far as how I got into this business, it's always a good question. You know what? When I was in law school, estate planning and tax planning were the only two classes that I liked. There's so many other disciplines that are based on jurisdiction and what the judge says and all of that. But coming from a science background, I like that tax planning and estate planning, for the most part, has a definitive answer.
Very good.
And as long as you can walk through the formulas, you can get to that definitive answer. So it was attractive to me because that's how my brain had been trained up until that point.
That's interesting because my background is in marketing, but I had to dabble in a little bit of law, just business law, for the sake of tying in with the marketing. But that was as much as my law was, just business law. So did any of your, say, parents or relatives, were they legals as well?
No, I was actually the first person to venture out into the legal space. So it was actually a little uncomfortable for my family. They were a little nervous. They really wanted me to do the sciences, either doctor or nurse or pharmacist. And I veered off their course that they had for me. So that created a bit of a ruffle for a year or two. And then they finally said, okay, clearly we can't stop her from going to law school. So they gave up.
That's very, very good. And from my podcast last week with Erin Moore, who's a Reiki healer, and she was telling me about my intuition. So my intuition tells me about you, that you are a devil for detail when it comes to the wills and the trusts and the estates.
It's true. It's true. I'm very particular. I like the word particular. Someone introduced that word to me a couple of years ago, and I said, yeah, that's right. I'm particular. I'm a particular, not about everything, but it's just certainly the important things. In your will, when you're coming to me to trust me to draft certain documents for you, I feel like they should be particular. So yes.
Good. Okay. Now let's get to the meat on the bone, which is what you do. Wills, trusts, estates. I'm familiar with power of attorney because I often have used that in different ways. And there are different types of power of attorney. So maybe for the sake of my audience, and they are very intelligent, some of the time. Let you explain what's the difference between a will and power of attorney.
Great question. So the will allows you to direct your assets. Who receives your assets? What assets specifically do they receive? And who takes care of your minor children? That's going to be the roadmap to tell people what you want to happen when you are not here. So that will, that document only becomes effective. Like it only steps into play after you've passed away. The power of attorney is saying, I'm alive. I'm here. I haven't passed away yet. But if I find myself in a situation where I'm incapacitated to the point where I can't make decisions for myself, I trust so-and-so, whoever that so-and-so is. If you can name anyone you'd like, I trust so-and-so to come in and make some financial and legal decisions on my behalf. Once you pass away, that power of attorney is now null and void. It just doesn't exist anymore. And that's important because a lot of people come to me and they say, my mom named me the power of attorney and she passed away and now the bank won't let me have access to her checking account. That's because the power of attorney ends when the agent passes away.
That's a very important answer.
Yes.
I would not have known that myself. I'm familiar with things like limited power of attorney, which the authority to somebody to deal with one matter. Let's say it's a contract
Yes.
for buying a house, or just maybe dealing with one institution or one pension.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, you can do that. You're right. So there's a limited power of attorney where you're giving someone access to manage maybe one thing, two things, three things. But then there's a general power of attorney that says whatever needs to be done from a legal or financial perspective, I give you the authority to do that. But again, once the principal, I said agent before, I meant principal. Once the principal passes away, then the power of attorney ends and the agent has no authority. Their authority then switches to the will.
Okay.
That's where the authority comes in at that point.
So to get a little bit more into detail, so then would the agent then have authority to distribute the assets of the deceased or no?
Not through the power of attorney. They only get that power through the will, assuming it's the same person. I could name you my agent for power of attorney to handle my legal matters while I'm alive, but then I have a separate will that names my husband the executor of my estate. So you two have two different roles in that situation.
All right, that's a very good answer. Okay, so I have, let me see. Somebody called me to ask if they are the executor of a will, right?
Mm-hmm.
And does that mean they can be included in the will, or they are just an executor?
The executor can also be a beneficiary in the will. So I could name my husband the executor of my will, and he's also the beneficiary. Okay. So whatever he's doing essentially is for the benefit of him.
Correct.
But that one person can hold multiple roles simultaneously.
That's very interesting. So the role of the executor then is to carry out the wishes and desires of the deceased, I guess, yeah?
Absolutely, yes. And let me make it clear, the will is great. You need the will before any of this can get started. But really, what's the true triggering point, John, is when the will is submitted to the surrogates court. Okay. If your will is never taken to the surrogates court, then nothing can really be done. Okay. And I say that because it's not uncommon for people to say, oh, my mom, my dad, my aunt passed away 10, 15, 20 years ago. And no one ever took the will down to the surrogates court. Okay. And you need to do that before the judge gives you the authority to act.
Okay, that's another good answer. Okay, so let me see. Another young man called me up, Brian Moore, and he's a bar manager on the Upper East Side in Hughes Bar. Okay. He says, I'm only a young guy. Why should I worry about a will? I have funds. I don't want to give it to my girlfriend because she might be a different girlfriend in a month. My family have more. Lucky him, says you. Good for him. And he says, my family have more money than the Vatican. So why should I worry?
Well, maybe in your situation, Brian, you don't have to worry about a will because the way the law is written is if you don't have a will, then the state of New York will just distribute your assets based on law. Right now, if you don't have children, and you don't have a spouse, whatever you do have will just go to your parents. And if you don't have parents, then it will go to your siblings. And if you don't have siblings, it'll go to your nieces and nephews. So the state of New York will try to find the next
the state of New York will basically decide if Brian doesn't decide for himself and unfortunately gets hit by a bus, which is unlikely, but then the government per se takes over and distributes it to his mother, his father.
Yes, exactly. And maybe that's what Brian wants. And Brian might hear this and say, well, that's okay. That's what I want to happen anyway. So why do I need a will? You still might need a you still may want a will to make the process easier for your family versus going through this extended process through the court. But here's another thing, John, really quickly. You may not need a will right now, but that doesn't preclude you from other parts of estate planning. He should probably have a power of attorney because he's over the age of 18 and his parents can no longer make medical decisions for him or legal decisions for him. Okay. So he may want the power of attorney and the healthcare proxy, even though he may not be ready for the will. So the will is not the only estate planning document. There are other things that Brian should consider. Okay, speaking of healthcare proxy, my nephew's good friend only died last week, which is very sad news for us. I'm sorry.
Indeed, thank you. And that's a big decision for somebody to make. Like if they're on a life support machine, you'll say, and someone has that authority to say, okay, let's end the life support or let's keep it going? How would you advise someone
Well,
on that?
that's a great point. Let me make a distinction. The living will is where you get to be very specific about end of life situations. So this is that narrow, very narrow situation where the doctor has said, we've done everything for this person. This condition is irreversible. They're not going to get better. There's no cure. You have the authority to put something in writing that says, this is what I want to happen. You're not telling someone else that they have the
Mm-hmm.
authority. You're actually directing your doctors and your
Okay.
family what you want to happen.
Okay. Interesting.
That gives you a lot more
Mm-hmm.
power. So you don't have to just keep your fingers crossed and hope that people make the right decision.
Mm-hmm.
You're telling people exactly what you want to happen in that situation.
Okay, that's a very good answer too. Thank you. I
You're
have
welcome.
another question from actually an older gentleman. When you mention, like, say, the state of New York or the court deciding and all that, this gentleman has a question and says he's been here for 30, 40 years. He never got his paperwork in order, so he's undocumented. What I guess I hate the term illegal alien, but he has no paperwork. So if we all die sometime. So if he passes away, what jurisdiction then would cover that?
He would still likely be considered a resident enough to be subject to New York probate laws.
Okay. So
Because
by
he's
virtue of
been
the
there
fact
for
that he's
so
been
long.
here X number of years, and then the will would probably state that, I guess.
If he has a will, then yes,
If he has the will, then that would
it'll
state,
still
yeah.
work. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I had to deal with a situation a few months back for an undertaker who's the same name as myself, where the gentleman that deceased left the lady in charge, and he left X number of dollars with the undertaker. But unfortunately, she died before he died, and it caused a lot of complications.
Yes, it
Okay,
does.
let me.
This is why it's good to have a backup for everything, because if the person you've chosen is not here, what are you going to do now?
I used to own my own restaurant in Ireland, and it was called Mother Hubbard's, and I was noted for having a backup. If the gas ran out, we had electricity. If the electricity ran out, we had gas. There was always you must have a backup.
Good.
Because there's no time to waste. And
Yes.
I suppose you would advise everybody to consider the power of attorney for sure, and consider the will also, number 2.
Absolutely.
Now,
even if it's not for yourself, John, think of you. I always tell persons, many of us have aging family members, whether it's our parents, our grandparents, our aunts and uncles. Even if you're not ready to get those documents for yourself, go to those older persons and say, listen, mom, at some point, I'm going to start taking you to your doctor's appointments. I'm going to have to go to your bank and handle your financial transactions. Do you feel comfortable naming me your power of attorney? So if not for you, think about doing it for the older people in your life who you know at some point you'll have to take care of them.
I have another question here from a girl, Finola is her name. She is the owner of the bar restaurant called Finnegan's Wake. How appropriate, a wake. With Finola from Finnegan's Wake wants to know, is it expensive to make a will? Like your fees, are they astronomical, or is it a percentage of the estate?
No, a will is a flat fee. It depends upon the complexity. In New York, we can do very simple wills. Simple meaning everything is going to your spouse or everything is going to your child. We can do that for about $775. It's a flat fee. The more complex and the more challenging your estate is, then we'll increase the price from there. But basic New York will, we can charge about $775 for that.
You should put your business card into Finnegan's Wake.
I will.
So let me say, I think we've covered quite a bit, like that's a lot of knowledge for my listeners to hear about and all that. How can my listeners contact you if they need help with a will, with a power of attorney, with a living will, with the healthcare proxy?
Great question. Firstly, feel free to call us. Our number is 646 504 6760. So that's 646 504 6760. Lydia Zabala, who is our client operations manager, will likely answer the phone and schedule a meeting with you. You can also go to our website, just my name, LillieNkenchor.com, and you can schedule an appointment for yourself. And then feel free to follow us on Instagram. I often share videos and pieces of information that I think are very helpful. And even on Instagram, it's just my name,
Well,
Lillie
Lily, you
Nkenchor
have been
PC.
Lily Nkenchor, you have been very helpful for me today.
Thank you.
Well, my name is John Healy. My podcast is called It's Good to Talk. I usually end my podcast with a quotation, and my quotation today is from George Eliot. And he says, "It's never too late to be what you might have been." George Eliot. That's like a preface to a will, isn't it? Lily, thank
Maybe
you
I
so
should
much.
use that
And
quote. You're welcome.
your information was fantastic. And I'm
You're
sure my listeners
welcome.
will enjoy. And I hope to spread the word if they enjoyed the podcast and if they
Thank
need to
you.
contact you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you.